Fashion Icons with Fern Mallis. Originally from New York, Fern Mallis needs little introduction, as she is a leading figure in American fashion. From 1991 to 2001, she was the executive director of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, and during that period, she created the influential event 7th on 6th. By 2001, Mallis became Senior Vice President of IMG Fashion, where she expanded the global reach of the company. Today, she is an independent fashion consultant and hosts the Fashion Icons Talks at New York's 92nd Y, which originated the book that she is speaking on and signing tonight. Please join me in welcoming Fern Mallis.
Sure, that's right. Thank you for that introduction, and good evening, everybody. So it's lovely to be here, and as you see, the book here is on the screen, and I hope we have time to, I hope you all buy it when this is over. And it's an especially good book for students and people in fashion, people going to FIT, and people interested in a career in fashion, because the book is really not about, you know, this collection versus that collection. It's really about these people as people and how they became what they became. And every single one on that book cover started with zero and built a business that is worth millions and billions. None of them were given their family's business or asked to come in and take over somebody else's job and, you know, to create a new line for somebody. They all started with a dream and a passion. And that's what interested me in creating the book, you know, and creating the series, finding out who they are. What is it? What are those triggers that make somebody, you know, persevere? You know, and when, you know, even talking to somebody like Marc Jacobs, I remember being in the auditorium when we got to the point of his 4th bankruptcy, you know, and I said to the audience, have you heard that? You know, he's now talked about being bankrupt 4 times. You know, how do you keep getting all that passion and energy to keep going and going, and where does that all come from, and what is it about these people, and what is it about their lives? And so, to that effect, you know, I think what I'm here to really also talk about is the book for me represents you know, a rebirth and a reinvention of my life and career at a very critical point in my life, and that's something that I'm very proud of about the book. And to explain to you how I got to be doing this book and got to be asking all these extraordinary people really interesting and serious questions, you know, I think it might be interesting for me to give you a little Fashion Lives with Fern Mallis of how I got to be who I am and how my path became the one that it did, and took me off these different roads and trips to get to do what I do. As you heard, I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, when Brooklyn wasn't the coolest place on the planet. And my dad worked not far from here in the Garment Center, as did both of his brothers. And I, as a child in Brooklyn, loved going to work with him any day off from school, taking the bus and the subway, and just going to work and being in the garment district when all these men were standing on the streets and everybody knew each other and all the fabric was going by and things were being shipped back and forth, and it was really, you know, the energy was so intense in the garment district. And it's when all these guys were called garmentos, and I say that very lovingly. You know, that to me is not a bad term. They were wonderful. They all had the best sense of humor. They knew the best jokes in the world. You know, they knew how to entertain and do everything, and they knew everybody. And my dad was in the scarf business, so I knew how to tie a scarf about 8,000 ways, and still have more scarves than I know what to do with. But the women who were designing them, there were no computers then and no CAD programs. They were in the art department drawing every little paisley, every print, and doing it in 5 different colorways, and then sending those things off to Italy and to factories to be made. You know, and my dad worked with the New York stores, so he always had appointments with with the buyers and the fashion directors, and I saw that that was a job for women. Like, look at these women had these, he was taking them to fancy lunches, and he'd bring me along when I was there, and I learned how to order nice food and have, tomato and clam cocktails when they were having Bloody Marys, and, and all the different wonderful aspects of growing up in that business. And my uncles were in textiles and in women's sportswear, and so I was always surrounded by it. And my dad always brought Women's Wear Daily home, which was like the regular paper in the house to read every night when he came home from work. So I always was paying attention to what was happening in the industry without even really knowing it. In high school, I went to Madison High School and won Best Dressed in the school, which was like a big deal at the time, and also won the Fashion Design Award. I was studying fashion design in high school and had a teacher that I still adore, and I said, when I finished, I'm going to go to college and study fashion design, and my dad said, no, you're not. He said, you're going to go get a liberal arts education and you're getting out of town, because I thought I'd be here at FIT, actually. And he said, you need to go away and have a campus and get away from your mother. And, and he said it was easier for me to leave the house than her. So I went to the University of Buffalo and, studied fine arts and graphic design and communication design, because I thought that had more merit as a career than fine arts. And when I was in college, I entered a competition called Mademoiselle's Guest Editor Competition. Do any of you remember Mademoiselle magazine? Thank God, somebody still does. It was unfortunately one of those magazines that Condé Nast shut down and never should have. But in my day, it was the most important women's magazine. It was for really intelligent women, and it was about writing and poetry and fiction and photography and fashion and all of the different disciplines. And so I entered the College Board, which really was a fancy focus group, I guess, because they would send out packages to thousands of college students around the country asking questions about the advertisers and things that they were doing. We'd fill out these forms and send them back. And, and then there was, if you wanted to move up in the College Board, you can enter another element in an area that you liked, and I did it in graphics, and I created a direct mail piece to sell Mademoiselle magazine as a, like a subscription, this big fold-out fun thing. And next thing I knew, I got a call from somebody in New York that said an editor was going to be on campus. Do you have some time to meet her? And I thought, oh, what? How cool! Somebody's going to be in this god-awful neighborhood in Buffalo. And sure enough, I was being interviewed as one of the potential finalists for the guest editor competition. And to perfectly date how far long ago that was, when I got a telegram telling me that I won. It was, one of the most exciting things I possibly could have happened to me in my life at that time. And so I was one of 20 students picked from all over the country to come to New York for the month of June, which for me wasn't the big surprise coming to New York. And we edited the college issue. Back then, September editions were college editions. All the magazines were back to school. That's when people bought new clothes to go back to school, not a new hoodie and a new pair of jeans. And so I was the guest art editor and spent a month there, and then was one of the only one in my 20 that was asked to stay on with a permanent job. And if that competition existed today, it would be a reality TV show. 20 girls picked from around the country, we were living in the Barbizon Hotel for Women. Would be in some fancy high-rise, and you'd all be fighting for the job or the boyfriend or the something. But it was a really terrific competition. Sylvia Plath was a guest editor before me, and Betsy Johnson and Ally McGraw, and all sorts of wonderful, accomplished people. So that, when people tell me, how did you get your career start, I really say I won a contest. And that is really how it started, by winning that contest, being at Mademoiselle. And after 6-7 years, I at that point, had been at the magazine going to college campuses to recruit new students for these contests and competitions, and then moved into merchandising, which is an area I loved, which was bringing the magazine's editorial message each month to life in department stores. And so I traveled across America from Hawaii to Peoria, Washington to Florida and wherever, and we'd do all these in-store promotions. And that's when every city had a store like Marshall Field's or Myers or Burdines, or they now were all Macy's. So at that time, Higbee's and Cleveland, I mean, they all had their own local families and personalities. And that travel and seeing that and seeing America was one of the most extraordinary experiences that I don't think I realized at the time, but it does give you a real sense of what retail, what fashion's about, what people are buying, what they're doing. I eventually came back, left the magazine. I wound up becoming fashion director at Gimbel's East, another place. Does anybody remember Gimbel's East? It was on 86th Street and Lexington Avenue, and it was the high fashion store of the Gimbel chain, which, for those of you who don't even know, was a big store on 33rd and Broadway. And I loved that job because I was doing windows and store events and our own ads. We were like our own boutique in the highest rent district in New York, completely different than the crowd at the 33rd Street store. And that lasted for a while until business changed, Saks Gimbel's, lots of changes in corporate. I did a short stint on 7th Avenue for a company, which I hated being on that side of the fence, having to sell. But I will tell you the one lesson I learned at that, and it stood me fast for my whole career. I was there, and it was Christmas time, and I was let go. It was the first time I was fired from a job. And I never forget being in 1412 Broadway, a building that, in fact, I ultimately came back to when the CFDA offices were there. So I did have a triumphant return to that building that I was fired in. And being fired at the holidays, all these people coming in with trays of cookies and food and candies, and I was miserable. I was like, I can't believe they just let me go. And I swore that time that I would never, ever fire anybody worked for me around a holiday or that time of year, and how insensitive that was. Just whatever that's worth. But then I started, next to my career, a public relations firm. And asked me, what did I know about public relations? Nothing, except that I thought I had 411 on my forehead. All my friends would always ask me, where do we get balloons for a party? Where do we get such and such made? I want to print up something. Where do we do that? Do you know this person at this magazine? I just designed something great, and I want to let somebody know about it. And I was always connecting people, always connecting the dots. And I realized, at some point, I said, I can get paid for that information. And so I started a PR firm, and I shared a desk in my friends' offices who were architects and interior designers, Scott Bromley and Marc Jacobs. And at the time, to put it in context, they were designing Studio 54. So that was not a bad place to work. We had a lot of fun, and the gal who ultimately became my best right arm and assistant helping me there in this little PR firm had just graduated from Vassar, and we met her through her father, the insurance broker for Scott and Robin. And she shared my typewriter return, and that's about the most space we had, and we shared our pea soup every day. And after 6 years, we eventually moved to another nice office. She went off to graduate school, and today she's the group global president of Estee Lauder, Jane Hertz-Marcudis, who's like my best friend. So this is the caliber of people who worked for me, and I am so proud of the people who've always worked for me, who've gone on to have great careers and great jobs. In the PR business, I started with a few fashion clients with Charivari, remember that place? With Selma Weiser and her stores on Broadway and helping do little events. It's the store where Marc Jacobs worked in the stock room. It was the fashion store in New York. And the clients shifted to interiors and architecture, and eventually my client became, I was representing all the furniture companies and all of the important textile companies and interior firms, and we helped to launch a big design center in Long Island City called the IDCNY, which you can still see in Long Island City when you cross the bridge. And planning that was probably one of the most exciting events I've ever really done, actually. But it was an interesting time, and I loved doing that, and I loved being in the design universe, because for me, fashion, design, lifestyle, taste, it all overlaps, it all connects. And while I was at the IDCNY, it was the end of, I closed my public relations firm to join them, because it became a really exciting project. And I became Senior Vice President of Marketing and Advertising, and gave all my clients away, and figured I'm joining the corporate world. And it was a fascinating experience, helping to lease this project designed with a master plan by IMPay, and working with Gwathmey Siegel Architects, and with Joe D'Urso, and with Massimo and Leila Vignelli, who I'm sure you all know, who did all the graphics and became important mentors in my life. I was working with the very best and the finest people in every aspect. And I learned so much there, how to get a whole industry organized and get the whole industry to cross that bridge and go to Long Island City for events and programs and what have you. And that experience held well for me when I was interviewing to get the CFDA job, because I knew that I was able to organize an entire industry. I could do it with them. I could maybe do it with fashion designers. So when the real estate boom crashed in the late 80s, when I was at the IDCNY, and they just stopped all the marketing, all the PR, all of the creative disciplines. It was the second time I was fired and let go. And then I took some freelance PR jobs in New York, working with friends, and working with Harriet Weintraub, and if you know LaForce Stevens, Leslie Stevens and I shared an office together with a big Rolodex, and we all go way back. And I heard about the CFDA and the event called 7th on Sale, big AIDS benefit that they were doing at the Armory. And I went to that party. I bought a cheap dessert ticket, because that's all I could afford. And I was blown away by what this event was. And I was very, very involved in AIDS fundraising, being on the initial board of DIFA, and coming up with lots of big events that I did for DIFA, because that was a time when we were all, losing all of our friends. And so we had to do anything we could and think out of the box all the time to come up with ways to raise money. So when I went to see this event, which was at the Armory, and it was 3 to 4 days of every designer with a little booth selling their stuff at wholesale. People bought tickets. They waited around the block for hours to go in, for 2 hours to shop. The event raised about $4.5 million for the CFDA, and the chairs were, Donna and Calvin and Ralph Lauren and Anna Wintour and Carolyn Rome, who was the president of the CFDA at the time. And when the event was over, everybody just was depleted. The organization, just took a break. Carolyn resigned and said she didn't want to stay on as president. The young man who was an executive director, who worked in an office about a little bit bigger than this podium, they didn't renew his contract. And I kept reading in Women's Wear Daily that they were looking for a new executive director. So I said, maybe I should throw my hat in the ring. And everybody at the freelance firm I was at said, yeah, oh my God, you'd be perfect for that. Why didn't we think of that? So I spoke to some friends and I said, who do I send a resume to? And they said, oh, call Donna Karan. I said, call Donna Karan. Yeah, like Donna's going to take my call. Why? And then they got back to me and they said, you know what? Stan Herman and Monica Tilley, who is a designer, are the search committee. Send something to them. So I sent them a resume on a Friday. And on Monday morning, I got a call. I said, how quickly can you get in here? And apparently they had already interviewed hundreds of people or hundreds of resumes and interviewed about 50, 60 people. And they were down to their 5 finalists. And they said, we need you to come in. So I came in and met with them. And this is where things come full circle in your life. When I was a Mademoiselle guest editor, we were broken up into groups of 4 or 5 to interview people in the industry. So 4 of the writers went to interview a writer. Some others went to meet an artist. My group went to meet a designer, and the designer was Stan Herman, who was designing Mr. Mort at the time. And so I said, I met you 20 some odd years ago when I was a guest editor at Madame Azalea. He goes, "Oh, I knew I remembered you." I said, "Oh, you don't remember me at all, but that's a good one." So it always helps to remember and be nice to people you've ever crossed paths with, because you never know when they're going to come back into your life again. So in any case, I had that initial interview with them, and they said, "We want you to come in, tomorrow and meet the next committee," which was Calvin Klein and Bill Blass and Carolyn Rome. And so I went in for that meeting, and I'd known Calvin Klein from Fire Island parties and being around New York, and hi, and Bill Blass. Actually, my father used to look like Bill Blass. I always liked him, and they said to me, "Why should we hire you? You haven't been in fashion in 10 years. You're not in this industry. This is a job about the fashion industry." And I said, "But I never stopped wearing clothes." And then I said, and I never stopped reading fashion magazines, and I never stopped shopping, and that the fashion was in my DNA. You either feel that and it's part of your life, or it's not. You can't really teach people that. And, we continued to talk more, and then then the next big meeting was the full-on board of, I basically was told that they were offering me the position. They'd met the other 5 people and the other finalists. And the next meeting was, which is coming up on March 26th, which is my birthday, and it was in a Carolyn Rome showroom in a big, huge conference table with everybody you could think of at the table, from, Calvin, Ralph, Donna, Oscar, Bill, Mary McFadden, Patricia Underwood, and Michael Kors, and just goes on and on. Every name that was on the board, including Eleanor Lampert, who had helped start the CFDA, and it was an intimidating group. The biggest crisis in my life for those 3 weeks was what to wear to every one of these interviews. It was not easy figuring that out. But we had this meeting, and it was a big challenge back and forth because I was very involved in the AIDS fundraising at DIFA, and Oscar challenged me that I wouldn't give enough time to CFDA, and I told him I would, and don't ask me to stop raising money for things that matter to me if my friends are dying, and I had a thing with Mary about the Partnership for the Homeless, and we really had a lot of little squabbles, but they sent me out while they deliberated, and I came back into the room, and the entire CFDA board sang happy birthday to me. So that's how my job started. And then what it was Market Week in New York when the shows were in April, the old schedule. And so I hadn't started yet. I needed to get things in order before I was going to start the job. But it was a Market Week, and that was the fateful week that Michael Kors had a show in an empty loft in Soho, in Chelsea. And as you know, when things are not nailed down and the bass music goes on in a fashion show, everything starts to shake and tremble. Well, the ceiling started shaking and trembling, and the ceiling started to collapse on the runway onto the shoulders of Cindy, Linda, Naomi, Claudia, all the one-name supermodels of the day, who just kind of brushed it off and just kept walking. It's why they get paid the big bucks. And but chunks of plaster landed in Susie Menkes's lap from the International Herald Tribune in the front row, and Carrie Donovan from the New York Times. And they wrote the next day, "We live for fashion, we don't want to die for it." And nobody remembers what Michael showed. Everybody was looking for emergency exits in case it got worse. It really was the shot from Sarajevo that set off the alarms in the industry. And I said, I think my job description just changed. It was never a discussion in any of the interviews that organizing fashion weeks or fashion shows would be, high on the priority list. It wasn't even on the list. And so it became really a fascinating time to figure out how do we create safe, sound places, and how do we organize the industry? How do we get all these egos together? And it became a mission to organize, modernize, and centralize. That was the words we used, trying to create a comfort zone around the garment district. And Bryant Park was the logical place. It was the backyard of the fashion community. And we, negotiated all sorts of deals with everybody, we being me and Stan Herman, who then became the president of the CFDA after I got the position. He said I could work with her because they were figuring out who would be president next. And so he took that job, and he was there for almost 15 years as president. And Bryant Park was under reconstruction at the time. It was, Needle Park in New York. It was a Blythe in the city, and it is one of the most beautiful urban renewals anywhere in the country. But it was not that at the time. The restaurant had not been built yet, and so we figured out. I hired a freelance production person who literally worked in the closet in our office. We put up a little shelf in there, and and actually one of the first things I did when I got to CFDA at 1412 Broadway was move to a higher floor, which you do in the industry. You never go to a lower floor, it's bad luck. You always go to a higher floor, and got my friend Scott to design it for us with really cheap stuff, so it looked like this could be a place that the American fashion industry's headquarters were. Because when I was hired, it was literally file cabinets, and I had to get up from the desk to go to the cabinet on the side to answer the phone. People thought that CFDA was an answering machine before I got there. And it was really, putting common sense together and figuring out how to get the industry to work on something together. And that was 1991 when I started. 1992, and in the summer of 1992 was, and now that we're on like Super Tuesday here, it was interesting. It was the summer of the Democratic Convention in New York City, and the convention that nominated Bill Clinton to be the nominee for the party. And I spent a year on a host committee with the people from the arts world, the museums, the theater, the hospitals. We were host committee planning a year for when this convention comes to New York. What are we going to do to put New York's best foot forward? How are we going to entertain the delegates and all the media and press that come for a convention? And so we, being fashion, said, well, we'll put on a fashion show. So we got, I think, American Express, if I remember correctly, and raised the money, put up a big tent in Central Park, which was the first time that they would let you put that tent up in the sheep meadow, only because it was such an integral event to New York, this convention. And we had every single designer participate, bringing clothing, a model or two models with their clothes, and they all came. And at the end of the show, Calvin and Betsy and Diane and Anna Sui and Todd Oldham and Isaac and everybody under the sun all walked down the runway with their models, and everybody stood, everybody showed up, and everybody was on the lawn with me and said, is this what you're talking about, a tent like this? Because we'd been talking tents. And I said, yes, exactly. It's the first time many of them had ever been in a tent that held about 1,200 people without columns, and everybody could see, and it was beautifully designed. And, it was like, okay, this makes sense. They all understood it. And the CFDA then, that was in the summer, they then gave me permission to go to Paris and Milan to study what was happening and come back with my R&D, which I did, and then came back and sat down and had meeting after meeting after meeting with everybody one-on-one, and lots of group meetings. Lots of meetings, and the hardest people to convince were all the young designers whose shows were not the most important ones, who were like, whoa, I have to be in my own place, the location, I have to have my own theme, my own this, my own that. And I would always say, hey, stupid, it's about the clothes. Make it easy for people to see it. Let's make it work for the world to come to New York and make this functional. And let's level the playing field. It was a lot of common sense kinds of instincts kicked in for me. And one meeting like that was at the 500 Club, where several designers and PR firms and production firms, everybody was complaining, everybody's finding their angle. And they said, well, is Calvin Klein going to do this? And I looked out, and in the front row was Calvin sitting there, and I said, Calvin, you want to come up and talk about this? And he got to the podium and he said, I absolutely am going to be part of this. He said, we have to do this together. This is the only way this is going to succeed. We all have to do this. And the first couple of years, which people don't remember, Calvin, Donna, Ralph, all were in the tents in Bryant Park before they moved out to their own locations and their own global businesses, which I completely understood. But we launched it together. I'll never forget that day. You know, it was called 7th on 6th, named after 7th on Sales. It was 7th Avenue moving to 6th Avenue. You know, and even when we were trying to get the tents organized and get this thing figured out, I remember having meetings with Mayor Dinkins, and we went up to Gracie Mansion one morning with a few of us and all of his team, and he was in his tennis whites, having just played tennis, and you know, and explained what we wanted to do. And he said, you know, we can't help you out with this. You know, there's no way, because, you know, then we have to help this group, and we have to help this thing with schools and that with that. And I said, but, you know, the fashion industry is here in New York. It's a huge base. If this industry is more successful, makes more money, there's more tax money coming into the city and more revenue that will help all your other programs. And he goes, oh, what are you talking? You know, he was very dismissive, I have to say. And I said, so then I said to him, I said, well, then I guess we'll just have to take up that offer in the Meadowlands. And he looked at me, he goes, what? Are you threatening to go to New Jersey? And I said, it's the only way anybody gets your attention in New York, Mr. Mayor. And it was like really brash of me to say that. But, you know, he then tried to help with permits and a few things that they could do. I'm sorry, you guys have my back up there. I'm sorry. And so the next thing to do to get this off the ground was how are we going to pay for it and raise money. So I'll tell you that little story and then we'll move on from there. But I didn't really know how much money we needed to make this work. But the first person who expressed interest in supporting it was the chairman of Evian Water, who I was introduced to from a friend who was selling him advertising. And she said, you know, they're going to spend a lot of money doing things with Evian now. It was the time when there was Evian and Perrier on the shelves, not 15 Waters. And he said, you know, we want to look for a new branding way to get our water to be cool and chic and everything. And, you know, I had the perfect platform for him. So he signed up, and the next call basically was to Anna Wintour and explaining what we were doing. And she said, how much money do you need? And I said, I think maybe $500,000. And she said, well, I'll speak to Cy and I'll get back to you. And so she did speak to Cy Newhouse, her boss, and probably later that day, because Anna's very quick and efficient, called back and said, we'll give you $100,000. I said, fabulous, thank you, I'll take it. And then I called the president of Hearst Magazines, and I said, Vogue is giving us $100,000. So he said, well, Harper's Bazaar will also. And then I called the president of Hachette Philippaki, and I said, Vogue and Bazaar are giving us $100,000. And he said, Elle will give you $100,000. And then Hearst called back and said, can we give you another 100 for Town and Country? I said, you sure can. And then, you know, I called friends at Clairol, and I said, you know, this is an American company, American product, we need hair and all of that. And they negotiated with them, they came on board. I called my former assistant, Jane Hertzmark, who was now the managing director of Prescriptives, a hot young brand at Lauder, and I said, Janie, you need to do this. She said, okay. She got us $100,000 in product and a sponsorship. And then I was like Michael Moore. I called General Motors. Can I speak to the president? And, you know, and if you just do that, they put you through, oddly enough. And I spoke to the president of General Motors and the assistant, and I said, we need a car company, and it should be America's leading car company. And she said, you know, this is really interesting. Let me get you, you know, can you send some information to us about this? And he eventually called me back. And David Pecker, who was the head of Hachette, publishes all the car and driver magazines. So he said, I'll close that deal for you. And he did. And that's how 7th on 6th got started and funded. And there was like a week, 10 days in our office of every one of those phone calls, and I'd hang up and go, ka-ching, ka-ching, we got another one. And we just took whatever money we got and we budgeted it to make that work, to build it out, and came up with all these systems. I said, let's register press, let's get credentials, let's do this, let's create a sponsor handbook. All of the things that anybody who goes to Fashion Week now just completely takes for granted and thinks was always there. It never happened. I mean, nobody ever had done any of that, and if, before that, like everybody knows, if there were 50 shows, there were 50 locations, nobody ever talked to each other. We now had a voice and a platform and had all the best shows in one location. The first season, we had three locations, 2 tents in the park, one on 6th Avenue, and we had the fountain in the back part of the tent. If you sat in the last row, you hit your head on the fountain. And that was called Elizabeth, so it was named after Elizabeth Shaw Lowell Fountain. The big tent was called Gertrude, and that also ran parallel to the library from 40th to 42nd Street on the east side of the lawn. And it was called Gertrude because in the back of the park is a statue of Gertrude Stein, and she would sit prominently backstage. And every show, designers would decorate her with scarves and beads and necklaces, and everybody would always take pictures, so she was Gertrude. And the third venue was in the public library, the Celeste Bartos Forum, so we called it Celeste. So those were our 3 muses, and that's how we started Fashion Week. And dare I say the rest is history. I mean, it just, who knew what that would become and could become, and now it's at a place where it's more disorganized than it was when I started it, but that's a whole other story. So that's what happened. I ran it for 18 years, at 10 of those years as director of CFDA. And while I was at CFDA, I was also involved with producing the awards galas, raising millions of dollars around the world for Fashion Target's breast cancer, doing other AIDS benefits and charities, and education programs, and creating the foundation of what the CFDA was to become and is today, which is quite a powerful and extraordinary organization. And after 10 years, IMG bought the fashion show component from the CFDA, and because we were hitting brick walls and raising the money and the sponsorships and robbing Peter to pay Paul, and had an office where everybody was, why is everything about Fashion Week? And all these designers didn't want to be involved in Fashion Week. And so we sold it to IMG, and I joined IMG because it was kind of my baby, and I didn't want to send my child off to some new parents. And I had done enough CFDA membership meetings and other events, and I thought this was a new global opportunity. And under IMG's auspices, we created Fashion Weeks. Well, first in the US, we created the swimwear shows in Miami, and an LA Fashion Week, and then Berlin Fashion Week, and Mumbai, and India, where I worked for 10 years on India Fashion Week, and Moscow, and I traveled to Dubai and Singapore, and every place you could imagine, and Tokyo, where people wanted to talk about how do we get a Fashion Week, how do we do what you did in America, and so it became an interesting opportunity. And I did that for the next 10 years, literally until the business climate began to change. At the end of, I saw the writing on the wall when Bryant Park was coming to a close. Unfortunately, the city bought into Bryant Park's complaints that why is the tent still here? We need, and they had already put in an ice skating rink for a couple of years, so they had to close early for us. And the dates had changed from New York being first on the calendar to last, which impacted working in the park. Thank you, Helmut Lang, for doing that and then disappearing 3 years later. But that's, I saw that what was going on at IMG was about moving the tents, and I was involved in the move to Lincoln Center because we knew it had to move somewhere, and it was to Damrush Park. But I could see that the memos that went to 3 people were going to 30 people. Everybody had to weigh in on everything, and the only word that I heard in our office corridor was EBITDA, 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 EBITDA. And I said, I didn't sign up for EBITDA. I signed up to work on creative projects with the designers about the industry, and the sponsors started to become more important than the designers at Fashion Week. And I said, when Bryant Park's over, I think that's when I'm going to leave. That was my that was my swan song. And I felt like, I said, let's make a huge party, which I got the New York Times to underwrite and close the tents. And it was like my bar mitzvah, leaving that party at that night. And if any of you have seen the movie The Tents, which is a documentary that was done, that's very much in there. And I said, let somebody else, it's a perfect time to make a clean break and let somebody else take it on at a new location. And that's what happened. And there was 5 years at Lincoln Center, and I think it's not a surprise to anybody in the media and the press. Everybody hated the shows up there. The lobby was way too big. There were way too many sponsors in it. It pissed off the true fashion audience, the editors and the buyers who had to run in and out of these venues. It was not convenient. As much as we would spin it that, it's on the Upper West Side, everything's on the West Side, it's Chelsea, it's back and forth, and it just didn't work, so and there were problems with cutting trees down, and the community board sued Lincoln Center, sued IMG for being there, and that's just been one headache after another. But so I always say that my timing, I thought, was impeccable. When I left, let somebody else do it. It was a whole new ball game. And then, which you'll read in my book, I hope, I took a year off, and I said, I'm just going to smell the roses, go to my house in the country, which I could never do for more than a long weekend, and really enjoy all of those things, and just figure out what's next. And it's really hard to figure out what's next, because I never really planned any of my jobs. Everything just came and evolved, and one thing led to another. I do believe that the universe delivers if you're just doing a good job and you're honest and real about it all. And so I entered what was then I called the coffee phase of my life. And what that meant was that I was getting a call every day from somebody saying, "Can I meet you for a cup of coffee? I have an idea. Would you meet me for a cup of coffee? I have this new business. I'd like your advice. Are you going to consult? Can I take you out for a cup of coffee?" I mean, it was making me crazy. Nobody wanted to buy me lunch or dinner. They just wanted coffee. It was just like, not going to make that commitment yet. And so I met with everybody under the sun, and lots of those projects were like throwing wet paper towels on the ceiling. Which ones are going to stick? They're so exciting. Wow, this is great. 2 days later, I didn't even remember what we talked about. But over all these coffees, things would evolve. And oddly enough, I was having a cup of tea with Timothy Greenfield Sanders, the fantastic photographer who'd always done my headshots and portraits and things through the years, at his studio way downtown on the Lower East Side. And he said, "I'm introducing you to a friend of mine, Betsy. She does all these speaker program bureau things." And I said, "Great." So I met Betsy for lunch. So I knew we were off to a good start. And she said, "You have a great story to tell, and you have this and that." And she said, "But you know what? I'm going to introduce you to my friend Susan, who runs the programming at the 92nd Street Y." And I said, "Okay." And we did have a cup of coffee. And Susan said, "Would you be interested in interviewing fashion designers for us at the Y? We love fashion. It's such a part of the culture of New York City, and the Y is such an extraordinary institution. I mean, I've gone up there many, many years to hear different people speak. If you're prime minister, president, author, musician, anybody doing anything important winds up at the Y, and winds up being interviewed by Katie Couric or Hoda or Charlie Rose or somebody fabulous also." So I said, "Well, I love the Y." And she said, "We've done one-offs, but we've never done like a dedicated program to fashion." And I said, "Well, I guess I could do that." I said, "I'm usually the one being interviewed, being asked the questions, but I guess I could string together some intelligent questions." And, and it appealed to my sense of what I always felt my description was in my job at CFDA, which was giving voice to the designers. Like, who are they? Why does this matter? Why do they matter? Why do these lives matter? It's not about hemlines up and down. I would get really mad when fashion was dismissed as a trivial industry, because it's anything but a trivial industry. And so I said, "Well, yeah, let's do it." And she said, we decided together, the three of us, to call it Fashion Icons with Fern Mallis. And she said, "Do you think you can get anybody good?" And I said, I'll try. Well, I think there were a few good people there. The first one I did ask was Norma Kamali, because I've known Norma for 40 years, and I adore her, and I also think she's probably one of the most creative designers in the world. And so I got my teeth wet with Norma, using index cards instead of my notes, which then became much more organized in little binders, and, and I realized, no, next time don't go there, and you don't need to waste time on this and that. And I really got it organized. And the next one was Calvin Klein. And when Calvin sat on the stage with me at the Y, and there's 900 people in the auditorium, I said, so why are you here, Calvin? You're out of business for 10 years. You have nothing to sell. You're not promoting a fragrance. You have nothing. And he said, well, I'm here because I really respect the Y. I'd spoken here many years ago. And he said, but I'm here because of you. You asked me, and I'm here for you. And I went, good answer. And Calvin really opened the door for me in many ways, because when Calvin did it, it was like a real vote of confidence. And, and Women's Wear was covering these really extensively with double-page spreads and articles and big pictures, and I did read, which I didn't know that, but when Donna was coming up to be interviewed, she called Calvin from her car and said, "What am I doing? What am I doing? Tell me what I'm getting into with Fern." And he said, "Oh, just relax. You're going to love it. Just have fun, and it's great." And and people like Tommy Hilfiger said, in all my life, he said, it was the best interview I've ever, anybody's ever done with me. His wife said, I've heard that story 1,000 times, but you made him human, and we got to see sides of Tommy that people never get to see. Tom Ford was, Tom Ford. It was the quickest sold-out interview I did at the Y. And not only did it fill the auditorium, but not only did they live stream to the world, but they live streamed to the second auditorium upstairs for 300 people who wanted to experience it in real time. The only time they had ever done that before was with Woody Allen for something. And Tom seduced everybody, men, women, and it was an extraordinary interview. Every one of them had something so unique and fabulous. Michael Kors was a scream. As any of you follow Michael Kors, if he wasn't a designer, he could be a stand-up comic. He's just so funny. Same with Isaac, and Betsy Johnson did her cartwheel onto the stage, and she says, I never do that when it's not a fashion show, but she did it for me. Oscar, it was the last really extensive interview with Oscar before he passed away, and his memory could put everybody else in that list to shame of the things he remembered so specifically of growing up in the Dominican Republic. And one story that he told that always makes me, very sad, but is extraordinary is, he said there were tons of flowers in their garden in the house in the Dominican Republic, and he would go out at night, and in the early morning in the mist, and he'd take a jar and he'd try to capture the dew from the flowers to make a fragrance. As a kid, he thought he can capture that and make a fragrance, and he obviously realized you can't do that, and that's not how you make fragrance. And he said, and years later, when he did produce his first fragrance, there's a dewdrop on the bottle, which goes back to him doing that. And he had a garden, he said, that his mother gave him, and his sisters each had a piece, to do something with. And he grew vegetables, he said, because he thought that he could sell them back to his mother. Everybody was an entrepreneur in the book. That's what's so extraordinary about it all. Tommy had a shop in the basement. Michael Kors had a shop in the basement making things. He started his own dry cleaning business at summer camp because he and his friend didn't like the way their clothes came back from the laundry. And he said that they were too wrinkled, so they would fold everything. Somewhere he got tissue paper and got it all folded and tissue paper everywhere, and put the clothes between wood bunks in the bunks and layers of wood to flatten everything and press it out. They were resourceful, crazy stories about everybody. Certainly Simon has great stories, Bruce Weber, Andre. Bill Cunningham. I probably, of this group, I'd say this probably was the most iconic interview. People who were there stop me all the time and say it was like experiencing history and being at a place that they couldn't believe. Because Bill is not an easy guy, if any of you know him, and he's very private. He's never seen the documentary of his life. He told me that he wouldn't see it because it ruined his life, because people stop him everywhere and talk to him, and he doesn't want to talk to everybody. He doesn't want people to know who he is. And I begged Bill for 2.5 years, begged him, Bill, come on. I mean, I know him forever, and we do have a very good relationship. I said, Bill, please, I want to, have you at the one. Okay, child. And then he'd run away and do his pictures. I'd hound him, and okay, child, I'll get. And he would just ignore me all the time. He'd never finish the sentence. He'd agree to it, but then he had to go take a picture. And so then one day he said to me, I was somewhere at some event, and he said, I sent you a letter why I won't do the why. And I said, you did? Where did you send that to me? And he said, I don't know. So the next time I saw him, he told me that he sent it to the Y. So I wrote to the Y, called them up. I said, if anybody finds a letter from the New York Times or Bill Cunningham, would you get it to me, please? And sure enough, they did. They found it, and it's that old, fashioned, really scrolly handwriting. It's not easy to read, but I've had notes from Bill in the past, so I deciphered it carefully, and it very much was, I love you, and I care about you, and I do it for you, but, he felt like he was tricked into doing this documentary by the paper, and he really, just didn't like the notoriety it brought him and all this stuff about his career and stuff. And so when I saw the note, and next time I saw him, I said, Bill, I got your note. I promise I won't bother you anymore. I figured, I let this man rest. It's okay. Well, about 6-7 months later, we were at the CFDA Awards on a Monday night in June. I had just gotten off a plane from Mumbai that morning, and I was in this saffron-colored chiffon, fabulous kaftani outfit. And we were both standing there chatting away and talking. And while we're talking, and he doesn't have the cool camera like all the other guys where they put names in and talk it. He still writes down everybody with this pad and pencil. And so he was writing somebody's name down while he was talking to me, and I had a vodka and soda in my hand, and he knocked it over and it spilled on me. Well, he got so upset and so ballistic. He was like, oh my God, I've never done this in my life. I've never done this. I can't believe this. What can I do? Can I get you, can I buy you a new outfit? And I said, Bill, I just came off from India this morning with this. No. Can I dry clean it? I said, Bill, it's vodka. It will dry. He said, please let me. I said, it's vodka. It will dry. If it was red wine, I'd kill you. And he just wouldn't leave my side. And he just was, oh, child, what can I'll do anything. I'll do anything you want. I said, will you do the why? And he said yes. And that's how I got him. But and I'll just tell you one story of something he told that night. But somebody have a tissue because my eye is burning. I know I have one in my bag there. Thank you. Oh, yeah, it's better. So I said to Bill, so tell me, and I do a lot of home research in my interviews. I mean, they're very thorough. And I said, so is it true that you dyed the red Balenciaga suit that Mrs. Kennedy was wearing to the funeral when her husband died, when President Kennedy was assassinated? And he looked at me and he said, I think it was Dior, actually. And I said, and you can hear gasps in the audience. And he was working at the time at a place called Chez Ninon, an in-house salon in Bonwit Teller. And Mrs. Kennedy was a client, along with all the other socialites in New York. And he said, yes, it's true. He said, she didn't have time. It all happened so fast. She didn't have time to get a black suit made. So she sent the red one in, and we dyed that Dior suit, and I dyed it black for her. So, I mean, when you think about that iconic picture that we all know so well of Jackie and the children and the whole day of that funeral is wearing a suit that Bill Cunningham dyed for her. It's pretty amazing, fashion history. So those are the kind of stories. I'm proud of the book. It's been traveling around the world doing it, talking about it and signing books, and it's in its second printing now, and I understand the Japanese are printing it, and we can edit it a little bit, but do it in Japanese, which is great. And I hope that there'll going to be a volume 2, because since that book came out, you know, I have interviewed Mr. Valentino and Victoria Beckham and Leonard Lauder and Iman and Cindy and Tim Gunn and Zach Posen and Stan Herman, and so there's a lot more stories to tell. And we have a lot of interesting people waiting to confirm. I wish I could tell you the next one is up, but hopefully there's somebody in May or June, and definitely in the fall. But it's just a nightmare scheduling the people that we want to get in there. But it'll be worth the wait, and so just check whenever you can on 92y.org, and you'll see what's doing there. Or follow me on Instagram and all that other crazy social media, and you'll find out what's going on. So I guess it's time now to get some questions from the audience. Today, is there still value for brands, especially emerging brands, to participate in Fashion Week? Yes. Yeah, it's always a value to participate in Fashion Week, but you have to manage the expectation and know what you're looking for and what you hope to get out of it, because you're in a very crowded field with a lot of competition and a lot of things going on. But it is a way to get exposure when people are looking for everything new. What are your thoughts on the trend of making Fashion Week more of an entertainment draw for the general public? Well, it already is an entertainment draw, and I think that there's more general public at most of the shows than there is trade. It really has changed, and social media has totally changed everything. You know, those images and noise and news are getting out about everything, and we live in a society now where people want everything instantly and immediately. You know, you're Instagramming things, you're Snapchatting things, and in 2 minutes that's over, or in 1 day it's over. I mean, everything is fast and furious. So I think I totally like the idea of switching the whole schedule around to more consumer-driven shows. I think it's time to shake it all up after all these years and make that work. If they're going to spend all that bells and whistles and money to do a big show, it should be for the people who are putting their hand in the pocket and taking their credit card out and buying the stuff. So that's my take on that. What is your craziest Fashion Week experience? Probably have to be here for another hour. But I would say, the craziest and toughest one was the morning of 9/11 when we had to close the tents down. That was quite an extraordinary day in my life and everybody's life in New York and in the world. But that was especially crazy and interesting and tough. What is your advice for a potential fashion designer? Okay, where do you start? The advice I give everybody all the time is to be nice. And people think I'm crazy, but the most important thing is to be nice, because, anybody going out and competing in this world, in almost any job, but especially in fashion, you're competing with a lot of talented people and a lot of people. And nobody wants to work with a diva or a prima donna. That is not part of the job description. You don't need to act like the crazy central casting, send me a designer, to succeed. People want to work with people who are nice. And so that's first and foremost. And then just stay true to your dream and become a sponge, take it all in, get away from your goddamn computer and your iPhone and experience the world and suck the world in and the people, and then bring that to your work and figure out where you belong in that world, and find an original voice that's not what somebody else is doing, that we need. Which fashion designer has the best presence? Is that presence like presents? Or, that's impossible to answer. There's so many of them. They all have a great presence. Who is your favorite fashion designer? I knew that would be coming up. I'm Madeleine Albright when it comes to that. I've really tried to be a diplomat and have been my whole career. I will say that when I joined the CFDA, I kind of regret now that I gave away closets full of amazing clothing at that stage in my life, when I had all Missonis and Ricky L. and old Gucci and not even Gucci. I had Versace stuff. I had everything. I wore all those great European brands, and I said, my job now is representing American fashion, American designers. I can't wear this anymore. And being New York, you don't have closet space to keep everything. And now I could kill myself. But I wear a lot of Indian designers. This is from a designer in India, the top I'm wearing today, because I still make about 50. I've made about 50, 60 trips to India, working on Fashion Week and now on the board of a diamond company there. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be back in India for a luxury conference, the Mint Luxury Conference from the Hindustan Times. And I am bringing Calvin and Donna with me and interviewing them both over there. So that should be a lot of fun. And that's after I come back from Charleston Fashion Week and Melbourne, all in the same month. Okay, I'm launching a plus-size clothing line with absolutely no fashion experience or education. How do you brand and network? Is there somebody that wants to meet this person after and sit with them and talk? I think it's a great idea to launch a plus-size line. I think it's going to be a little difficult with absolutely no fashion experience or education or any information. That's where I guess the internet and being resourceful helps. Do as much homework and research as you possibly can, and try to get somebody who can help you with a little bit of a business plan. Try to find somebody who you know and who trusts you and loves you and who has some money to spend, because the only way that a designer can be successful today is to have a partner who has some financial resources and acumen. You can't do it all yourself. You absolutely need a business partner. What designer that you've interviewed surprised you the most? Why and why? And this is a two-part. And what are your thoughts on all the recent changes to Fashion Week and the direction it's going? Okay, so we did that part. What designer that you've interviewed surprised you the most and why? I'm not sure. I think, Victoria Beckham surprised me a little bit because she was so much more warm and funny and outgoing than I had expected her to be. Everybody kept saying, oh, is she going to smile? Is she ever going to smile? And she smiled throughout the whole thing. I mean, she was great. I'll tell you, one of the most difficult ones I didn't make the book, was one from the first group, was Lauren Hutton. Love her to death, but wackadoodle. In the middle of the interview, asked if she could have a cigarette, and we said, no, you're on the stage in a building in New York, you can't smoke. 2 minutes later, she asked again if she could smoke, and we said no. And then she had a whole thing about mints and her dry mouth, and then she was moving around because she didn't like the lights, and she was turn the lights up, and then she was looking at the audience going, anybody have a question? And I said, I've been trying to ask you questions all night. Anybody who knew me or saw me after that for months was like, boy, you earned your stripes that night. What do you think is not yet happening in the fashion industry? Or what is the next revolution in fashion? If I had that crystal ball and answer, I'd be very rich and I wouldn't be standing here right now. What do you think is not yet happening? A lot of things are not yet happening, and yet everything is happening in fashion. It's the center of many things in the universe. I really can't give an intelligent answer to that. That's it. Anybody else? One more question? If somebody wants to raise their hand? Last one, okay, but that.
I don't know the best way to articulate it, but how do you do so many things at once? It just seems like you do an incredible amount of things at once all over the world at the same time. How?
That's a good question. I'm trying to figure that out also. How do I do everything I'm doing all over the world, seemingly all at the same time? I have a lot more stamina than I guess a lot of people do, than most of the people a third of my age. But I mean, I'm curious and I like doing it. I'm actually right now a little reticent and exhausted thinking about my upcoming trips, because literally on Sunday I leave for Melbourne and I'm going to go to the fashion festival there, which is a consumer fashion week that they've been doing for 20 years there. And I've been to it once before, and it is the model of what I think people are talking about doing here. You know, and I do come back for 3 days, and then I'm off to Charleston Fashion Week where I consult, and then I'm back for a day and a half, and I'm off to India for 2 weeks. So if you're following me, you'll see how I managed to do it somehow. I don't know, but, and I have to figure out what vitamins to take or something. But I try to drink a lot of water. Do we have time for more?
Yes.
Okay.
What do you think of fashion sculpture that has recently been coming up all over the place, things like pins?
What do I think of fashion sculpture and
Do
pin?
you think of it as fashion? Do you think of it as art and sculpture?
I'm not quite sure what you're describing, but I mean, are you talking about 3D printing and?
It's Pratt 14th Street. There was a sculpture show where they had pins sticking out that models were wearing sculpture that was fashion.
It's sculpture and fashion and art and all of that. There's a role for all of it in there. I mean, you gotta experiment and have fun with it. I mean, you know, who defines art?
Integrated into fashion.
Conceivably, yeah. Yes.
What's your definition of, how would you define the word hipster?
How would I define the word hipster? I'm not sure I want to define the word hipster.
Where do you see the fashion tech or fashion technology kind of going in the future? That there's like endless.
I think 3D printing is a big part of the future of fashion. And, you know, I think it's important for schools and everybody to teach more about it and learn about it. And I think it's important. Yeah.
Do you think you would ever go back and run Fashion Week again? Because when you ran it, it ran so smoothly and, you know, kind of was your baby. Do you think that, you know, that would be something you would do? We would love that.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Would I ever go back and run Fashion Week again? Because it was so good when I did it. It was a time and a place, and it all worked, and it's a whole other universe now, and the answer is no. Okay, last one. Have I ever done any mentoring? My entire career, that's all I do is mentor. And, you know, I mean, when Fashion Week started, I used to come here to FIT and talk to hundreds and hundreds of students at a time to get them to come and volunteer and be volunteers at Fashion Week and talk to them about what that meant and why it was good for their careers. I mean, I've seen more resumes in my life where every student and everybody going for a job worked at Fashion Week. And sometimes I read a resume and I go, I think they had my job. But you know, it's all about getting young people interested and excited and to participate and be there and learn and, you know, and mentor in various ways. But I don't want to talk more because I want you to buy my book and I want you to go up there and then we can sign it and personalize it for you for gifts and things and what have you. So thank you.
People already bought the book. Just do it here.
So should we tell people how to do it? Do they know that?